welcome to Sleepy Art Critic. In this episode, we journey into the shadows of the Baroque to uncover the life, art, and legend of one of the most turbulent and transcendent figures in Western art history, Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio. You've seen his blinding lights. You've felt the weight of his shadows. His paintings hang in cathedrals, museums, and haunted corners of art history. But behind every glowing saint and anguished martyr lies a story of exile, violence, genius, and desperation. In this documentary, we'll trace Caravaggio's journey from plague-stricken Milan to the courts of cardinals and the prisons of Malta. We'll explore how he redefined religious art with the rawness of real life, and how his brush became a weapon of both expression and self-destruction. And as we dive in, let's talk. Have you ever stood in front of a Caravaggio painting and felt its pull? Which of his work shakes you the most? Is it the light, the realism, the tension, or the humanity? And here's a big one. Who should we explore next on Sleepy Art Critic? Tell us in the comments. We're always reading, always listening. Now take a breath. Let your eyes rest. Or close them if you want. And let's slip into the chiaroscuro world of a man who painted as if salvation depended on it. This is the story of Caravaggio. Between light and blood, he painted saints like sinners, and sinners like saints. He brought God down to earth into alleys, brothels, and taverns, and then he vanished, leaving behind a trail of masterpieces and corpses. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio didn't just revolutionize painting, he set it on fire, illuminating the divine with shadows and turning violence into transcendence. But behind every canvas was a man at war, with the world, with the church, with himself, a fugitive, a genius, a murderer. This is not just the story of an artist. This is the story of the man who dragged the Baroque into the shadows and painted the truth in chiaroscuro. Caravaggio was born Michelangelo Merisi in 1571 in the small town of Caravaggio near Milan. His very birth seemed to be set under an ominous star. Milan was then a city under siege, not by armies but by plague. Death was not a stranger, it was a neighbor. His father, Fermo Merisi, worked as an architect and decorator for the local nobility. But any semblance of stability evaporated when the plague swept through the region in 1576, claiming both his father and grandfather within days of each other. The child Michelangelo, just 5 years old, was thrown into a household bereft of male authority. The trauma was indelible. In his formative years, Caravaggio learned to associate religious imagery with suffering. The omnipresence of death was not a theme he would later adopt for effect. It was the atmosphere of his childhood. At 13, he was apprenticed to Simone Peterzano in Milan, who claimed to be a pupil of Titian. Peterzano introduced him to the fundamentals of painting and, crucially, to the naturalistic style of Lombard art. The region had its own pictorial traditions, more sober, earth-toned, and closely observing real life than the idealized forms emerging from Florence and Rome. Peterzano's studio also exposed Caravaggio to the works of Leonardo da Vinci and other masters who had begun exploring chiaroscuro techniques, the manipulation of light and dark to model forms. It was here that Caravaggio likely first understood the emotive power of shadows. In his early 20s, Caravaggio arrived in Rome with little more than the clothes on his back and a portfolio of unfinished ideas. Rome, at the time, was undergoing a spiritual and aesthetic transformation. The Counter-Reformation had ignited a resurgence in religious art that was expected to inspire, instruct, and discipline. Caravaggio initially worked under the radar, taking odd jobs in the studios of established painters like Giuseppe Cesari, known as the Cavaliere d'Arpino. His tasks were humble, painting flowers, fruits, and backgrounds for more prominent figures. Yet even in this lowly work, Caravaggio demonstrated astonishing talent. His still lifes were not decorative flourishes. They were revelations of texture, ripeness, decay. By the mid-1590s, Caravaggio's works like Boy Bitten by a Lizard and The Fortune Teller began to attract the attention of art dealers. He painted young men with ambiguous gazes, bruised lips, and suggestive postures. Whether these works were biographical, allegorical, or simply provocative remains debated. But they were unforgettable. His breakthrough came with the card sharps and the musicians. These were genre paintings, scenes of everyday life, but with a psychological intensity and compositional discipline that lifted them above the ordinary. Light became a character. Faces told stories. Then came Cardinal Francesco Maria del Monte, a polymath and diplomat with a taste for the avant-garde. Del Monte welcomed Caravaggio into his household, offering him not only shelter but a network of elite commissions. With this, Caravaggio entered Rome's high society, but never became one of them. The commission for the Contarelli Chapel in San Luigi dei Francesi was a test. Could Caravaggio handle sacred history on a grand scale? He didn't just handle it, he detonated it. In The Calling of St. Matthew, Christ steps into a smoky tavern. The beam of light that cuts across the canvas isn't just illumination, it's divine election. The tension in the scene is palpable. Levi, the future St. Matthew, points at himself in disbelief as if asking, "Me?" The martyrdom of St. Matthew is chaos incarnate, a swirl of bodies, anguish and motion, a man being stabbed mid-prayer, witnesses fleeing in panic. And in the corner, a self-portrait of Caravaggio himself, watching. The final painting, the inspiration of St. Matthew, had to be redone after church officials rejected the first version. The original showed Matthew sprawled on a bench, his feet bare and dirty, being guided by an angel who looked more like a street urchin. Too earthy, too human. The replacement still retained Caravaggio's hallmarks but was slightly more restrained, a compromise between the revolutionary and the acceptable. These works established Caravaggio as Rome's leading artist. But the seeds of self-destruction had already sprouted. With fame came notoriety. Caravaggio's name appeared in police records nearly as often as in art catalogs. He brawled with rivals, insulted critics, and stormed through the Roman streets like a man possessed. The brawls were not always about art. One report details an argument over a woman at a tennis court that escalated into a sword fight. Another arrest stemmed from throwing a plate of artichokes at a waiter. He seemed incapable of moderation. Yet during this turbulent period, he created some of his most powerful work, Judith Beheading. Holofernes is a brutal study in execution. Blood spurts with anatomical precision as Judith, a young widow, decapitates the Assyrian general. Her face is both repelled and determined. In Amor Vincit Omnia, he painted Cupid with a smug grin surrounded by the tools of human ambition, armor, music, geometry, conquest. The painting was scandalous, both for its sensuality and its message. Then in 1606 came the killing of Ranuccio Tomasoni. The exact cause remains murky. A gambling debt? An insult? A love triangle? What is clear is that Caravaggio stabbed Tomasoni, severing a femoral artery. The man bled out in the street. Caravaggio fled Rome that night. He would never return. Naples, Malta, Sicily, and back again. Caravaggio's final years were a fevered flight across the Mediterranean, but even as he ran, he painted. In Naples, he completed the 7 Works of Mercy, a dense composition depicting acts of charity amidst urban squalor. Each scene, feeding the hungry, burying the dead, is enacted simultaneously, choreographed like divine theater. In Malta, he painted the Beheading of St. John the Baptist, a work so monumental it overwhelmed the chapel walls. Blood flows in a slow, symbolic arc. Caravaggio signs his name in crimson, as if branding the violence. He also painted a deeply introspective St. Jerome writing, the old scholar bathed in light, surrounded by skulls and ink pots. But peace eluded him. After a violent altercation with a knight, he was imprisoned. He escaped, fled to Sicily, and continued painting, though increasingly haunted. In the burial of St. Lucy, the figures dissolve into gloom. Faces blur. The ground itself seems unstable. He returned briefly to Naples in 1609, where he was attacked by unknown assailants. His face was disfigured. He began sending paintings back to Rome, David with the head of Goliath, with his own face as the severed head. A plea for forgiveness, a confession. He embarked on a final journey to Rome to secure a pardon. He never made it. In July 1610, Caravaggio died on a beach near Porto Ercole. The circumstances remain a mystery. Some say he succumbed to malaria. Others claim he was assassinated. His belongings were confiscated. His body was buried hastily. No monument marked his passing. Rome barely noticed. For centuries, Caravaggio was dismissed as a violent genius, admired but mistrusted. His art, too visceral, too real, was out of step with the times. It would take 300 years for his true legacy to emerge. Today, Caravaggio is recognized as one of the pivotal figures in Western art. His innovations in lighting, composition, and psychological realism paved the way for Baroque drama, Dutch realism, and modern cinematic technique. Artists from Rembrandt to Rubens, from Gentileschi to Velázquez, owe him a debt. In the 20th century, his influence re-emerged in film. Directors like Scorsese, Pasolini, and Derek Jarman cited him as an inspiration. Exhibitions of his work now draw millions. Scholars unravel his methods, his pigments, his references. Each painting is a labyrinth of theology, humanism, and autobiography. But beyond the technical mastery is something deeper, a vision of humanity in extremis, of sinners begging for grace, of killers seeking salvation, of saints with dirt under their nails. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio lived like his paintings, intensely, violently, and with blinding clarity. He found beauty in bruises, holiness in filth, redemption in shadow. He didn't want to paint what was ideal. He wanted to paint what was true. And that truth still looks us in the eye from the canvas 4 centuries later.